Marina Navarro seemed like a very strange girl. She was withdrawn and quiet. When she was about 6, she was adopted by a young couple who couldn't have children of their own. They first saw her performing a song, one about the sea, sad and haunting. Her little voice sounded so pure and clear that it was impossible not to fall in love with it. The young couple wasn't bothered by the fact that the girl barely spoke to anyone and looked at others from under lowered brows. "Her heart is big and kind, I feel it," said Teresa, and her husband nodded in agreement. "You're right, darling," he whispered. Then, turning to the orphanage director, he said firmly, "We want to adopt the girl who sang so beautifully." When Marina moved into her adoptive parents' home, for the first time in her life she had her own room. It was painted in pleasant peach and pink tones, but the girl grimaced as soon as she stepped inside her new bedroom. Noticing this, her mother leaned toward her. "Is something bothering you?" she asked gently. "These colors," Marina said softly. "They irritate me." "But most girls love pink," Teresa said, taken aback. "Your dad and I thought you'd like it." "I love turquoise," Marina admitted. She showed her mother the pendant hanging around her neck. A shell coated in turquoise enamel hung from a long silvery chain. "Where did you get that?" Teresa asked, examining the pendant. "They told me I've had it since I was very little," Marina shrugged. "I never take it off." Teresa straightened up and nodded. "All right, my dear daughter," she said kindly. "Your dad and I will repaint your room in your favorite color." And so Marina's very first wish immediately came true. It was strange and unusual for her. Nobody had ever listened to her opinion or needs before. Marina felt a new, unfamiliar sensation. She was loved and accepted. Her mom and dad really tried to please her in every way. They bought her books about the sea, which she adored, and took her to the shore, where she collected seashells and pretty stones shaped by the waves themselves. At home, she would spend hours sifting through her treasures. At bedtime, she placed them under her pillow. Marina simply could not live without the sea. When it was time for her to start school, Teresa noticed that the girl had become more anxious. Strange dreams began to torment her. She woke up crying from them. "What did you dream about, my dear?" Teresa would ask, sitting beside her and stroking Marina's hair to calm her down. "I dreamed that other kids cut off my hair," Marina sobbed. In other dreams, her classmates burned her notebooks, tied her to a chair, bullied her, and even pushed her out the window. Teresa couldn't understand where these fears were coming from. She thought it would be a good idea to take Marina to a psychologist, but the girl flatly refused. She crawled under her bed and wouldn't come out until her mother promised not to force her to see a therapist. However, Teresa couldn't say the same about school, so Marina had to go. For the girl, it was real torment. Her classmates didn't like her because she was withdrawn, and many thought she looked down on them. Teresa hoped the situation would improve with time, but the older Marina got, the more strained her relationships at school became. The boys noticed her, but it irritated them that Marina paid them no attention at all. They called her an outcast, but she simply ignored their words. The girls started to envy her unusual beauty. Marina had long reddish copper hair, large stormy sea-colored eyes, and velvety lashes. Their cutting remarks hit her heart like icy raindrops, and with each passing day, Marina withdrew further into her own secret little world. Her parents did their best to support her, especially Teresa. She urged Marina to be friendlier and try to get along with her classmates. But the girl only shook her head in response. She knew her mother meant well, but she felt bitterly that Teresa was incapable of truly understanding her. Marina still had nightmares where other children tormented her and drove her away. She sensed these dreams were not random, but she couldn't explain why. Over time, she learned to stifle her screams and stopped telling Teresa about them, fearing her mother would again insist on therapy. The sea was the only place where Marina felt like herself and could breathe freely. There, she didn't need to pretend that everything was normal. She would wade into the waves up to her chest and stand for a long time with her eyes closed, as if absorbing the spirit of the sea. Year after year, it gave her the strength to go on living. Meanwhile, Alejandro was extremely displeased. He sat in the back seat of his father's car, which was taking him and his brother to school, and kept tugging at his seatbelt in frustration. He had recently heard some news he didn't like at all. "Dad, are we really moving to that backwater place just because Roberto needs peace and sea air?" Alejandro couldn't hold back. Roberto was his younger brother by a year. He had been born prematurely and was weak and often sick. Their parents constantly worried about his health, and when Roberto got older, he started taking full advantage of it. Alejandro saw right through his brother, and it infuriated him that their parents often forgot about their older son. His own needs and desires always came second. His family's world revolved around Roberto, who was perfectly happy with this arrangement. "Your brother's body is very frail," their father said. "Being by the sea will help him get better. Don't be so selfish, Ale." Alejandro almost exploded at those words. Him, selfish? He shot a glance at his pleased younger brother and hissed under his breath, "I wish you'd been born into some other family on the other side of the planet." Roberto stuck out his tongue at him. "Dad, I can't wait till we finally move. Will you buy a yacht so we can go out to sea?" Their father smiled at him, looking in the rearview mirror. "Of course, son. Why not?" he replied cheerfully. Alejandro's father was a wealthy, successful businessman who had already bought a beautiful mansion just 10 minutes from the beach. Alejandro sighed. "But all my friends will stay here," he complained. "You'll make new ones," his father said. "What about the theater academy? And soccer? You can still take acting classes. I'm sure they have a drama club there. And you can kick a ball anywhere." "It's not the same." Alejandro burst out. "I was supposed to make the league team next school year." "I understand, but your brother's health is more important," his father replied reasonably. "What about my mental health? Don't you and Mom care about that at all?" Alejandro retorted indignantly. "Ale, you're exaggerating," his father began to get angry. "Sure I am," his older son sulked. "No one in this family cares about my opinion, not even the cat. And if I drop dead from boredom in that dump, that doesn't matter to anyone either." They didn't say another word. Getting out of the car, Alejandro slammed the door as hard as he could to vent his anger. A couple of weeks later, they moved. Alejandro liked his new room. It was bright and spacious, with a view of the sea. But he was still mad at his parents and brother. It was Saturday, and their belongings were scheduled to arrive only the next evening, so Alejandro quickly got bored. He played some video games on his tablet but soon tired of them. "Great, not even a couple of hours in and I'm already sick of this place," he grumbled. He didn't want to spend time with his brother, so he decided to head out for a walk on the shore. He'd only been to the sea once before, when he was about 7. He had hated it, the whole trip. His mom had fussed over his brother, leaving Alejandro practically on his own, and he nearly drowned playing in the waves. Ever since then, he was wary of the sea and stayed home whenever his mom took Roberto to another health resort. And there it was before him again in all its grandeur, the sea. Alejandro sighed and walked slowly along the shore, breathing in the salty air. He tried not to think about everything he'd left behind. There was no point. His old life was over. He had to start from scratch now. He walked for a long time until he suddenly noticed a lone figure up ahead, sitting on an old overturned boat, gazing at the sea and singing. But Alejandro couldn't hear her voice because of the wind and crashing waves. He took a few more steps and realized the singer was about his age. What is she doing here all alone? And why is she singing, he wondered. Suddenly, the wind changed direction, and Alejandro finally heard the melody. He froze for a moment. He had never heard anything like it. The girl's voice was magnificent. Unbelievable, he thought. She's like a mermaid. He moved a little closer, and the girl, hearing the pebbles crunch under his feet, turned her head. Alejandro froze again. He had never seen eyes that color before. She gave him an indifferent look, then turned back to the sea. She clearly wasn't in the mood to chat with a stranger. Alejandro felt embarrassed and, after standing there uncertainly for a bit, turned around and headed back home. The next day, he unpacked his things and arranged them in his closets, carefully placing his sports trophies on the shelves. "Now this place is livable," he muttered, glancing around the room. He spent the rest of the evening watching TV shows. The following day, their father drove him and Roberto to their new school. "I hope you'll like it here," he said, stopping the car in front of a small two-story building painted a dreary gray. "Yeah, I can already feel I won't be able to live without this place," Alejandro said sarcastically, slinging his backpack over his shoulder. Roberto said nothing. He felt tense because he hadn't gotten along well with his classmates in his old school. Unlike their parents, those kids hadn't been quick to grant his every whim. He wasn't sure how things would turn out here and eyed the gray building anxiously. As soon as they got out of the car, Alejandro headed for the school at a brisk pace without waiting for his brother. He didn't look back at Roberto, even when he ran up the steps and pushed open the heavy door. He could feel people's eyes on him but didn't meet a single gaze. He didn't care. He found the right classroom and went in. The room was noisy, and all eyes turned to him again. Newcomers were rare in this small town. The boys fell silent, sizing him up. Is he cool or a nobody? The girls whispered among themselves. Alejandro was tall and good-looking and always attracted female attention. Alejandro looked around for a free seat. "They're all taken, dude," one of the boys yelled. "Only the outcast seat is free." He pointed toward the back desk by the window and gave an unpleasant snicker. Alejandro shrugged and walked toward the indicated seat. Everyone watched, holding their breath. As he got closer, he jolted in surprise. Seated there was the same girl he'd seen on the beach. When Alejandro set his backpack on the desk, she didn't even glance his way. Her stormy-colored eyes stared straight ahead, as if the rest of the world didn't exist. The bell rang, and Alejandro quickly sat down, taking out his notebooks and textbooks. "Class, did you meet the new student?" asked their elderly teacher, entering the room. "He's handsome," one of the girls cooed dramatically. Alejandro didn't turn his head. "Why do they call you an outcast?" he whispered to his seatmate. She didn't react at all, as if she hadn't heard him. Alejandro sighed and began mechanically copying what the teacher wrote on the board. "I'm not like them," he suddenly heard. "I already figured that out," Alejandro replied with a smile. "And you're still talking to me?" Marina asked, surprised, looking at him for the first time. "I see no reason not to," Alejandro said seriously. "Why should you have to be like them?" "I don't think so," the girl said softly. "But they don't accept me." "Well, that just means they're idiots," Alejandro concluded. The teacher shot him a stern look, so they fell silent. After class, Alejandro offered to walk Marina home. Unexpectedly, she agreed. She herself didn't know why she felt so at ease around him. It felt almost like being alone with the sea. Whether they talked or stayed silent, that calm never left her. Maybe I found a kindred spirit, she wondered. She'd heard of such things but never believed it could happen to her. The girl was so used to living in her own world, letting no one else in. Now, she suddenly sensed that someone understood her, and for the first time, she wanted to open up to someone. From then on, Alejandro and Marina went everywhere together. This only widened the gap between her and their classmates. The girls who wanted the new boy's attention grew even more jealous of her. The boys were annoyed that she chose Alejandro over them. Gradually, the pair's friendship turned into something more. Alejandro and Marina fell in love. Their relationship was tender and delicate. Alejandro kissed Marina for the first time by the sea. Both were happy, and they believed it would always be that way. They studied together in a cafe, strolled along the shore hand in hand, and messaged each other in the evenings. Time passed quickly, and soon Alejandro and Marina were about to graduate. It was time to choose their future, and they agreed theirs would be shared. Alejandro wanted to study acting, and Marina, who only wished to remain close to the sea, didn't mind which city they went to, as long as it had a coast. They found a fairly large coastal city with many good colleges. We'll go there together, and a whole new life will begin for us, said Alejandro. He was full of optimism, feeling every door was open to him. Marina was also happy and eagerly awaited the end of the school year. She decided not to go to college but to find a job in a cozy cafe. I'll be a waitress or a barista, she told Alejandro. But you could sing, he objected. Better yet, study voice professionally. With your talent, you'd get accepted on the spot. Marina only shook her head. I don't want that, she said simply. I'll get a job in a cafe near the sea and enjoy life. Alejandro gently stroked her hair. As you wish, he replied softly. Alejandro began preparing for his entrance exams. Meanwhile, Marina spent her days wandering by the sea. One evening, Alejandro was studying as usual when his phone chimed. There was a message from Marina. I'm scared, she wrote. Alarmed, he immediately called her. What happened, my love? He asked. Are you home? And right away, he realized she wasn't, because he could hear the roar of the sea on the other end. I'm at the shore, Marina said, her voice barely audible through the crashing waves. What are you doing there? Why aren't you going home? It's almost dark. Alejandro asked anxiously. Marina didn't answer immediately. I'm just sitting here. I have this terrible feeling, and I know if I go home, it'll only get worse. I'll come right now, Alejandro said firmly. I'm near the old lighthouse, she added in a distant voice. Alejandro reached the place in 20 minutes. He peered into the darkness, trying to spot her silhouette, but the night swallowed all shapes. The sea had become a bottomless black pit. Above him, the stars shone brightly. Marina, he called desperately. Only the furious crashing of the waves answered him. A storm was brewing, and he didn't know what to do or where to find her. His heart thumped wildly in his chest. Rain began to fall, each drop heavier than the last, and soon he was soaked to the skin. Marina, he shouted again into the darkness that seemed to mock him. Suddenly, he heard someone singing. Thank God, I found her, he whispered, racing toward the sound. Marina was standing on a boulder, singing, oblivious to the rain and piercing wind. You're freezing, Alejandro murmured, wrapping his arms around her. She pressed herself against him. You're here, was all she said. We need to get out of the rain, he said, worried, scanning their surroundings. He saw the looming silhouette of the lighthouse above them. We'll shelter in the old keeper's house, he decided. He helped Marina down from the rock, and they ran to find cover, holding each other's hands tightly. The house was just one modest room with an iron bed, a table, and a chair. It's dry here, and fairly warm, Alejandro said. He noticed a few blankets and used one to cover Marina. But it would be best if we lit the fireplace, if that's even possible, he mused. He went to the fireplace mantel and found a box of matches. Inside the hearth lay some firewood. That's lucky, he said happily. Kneeling down, he lit the fire. Marina sat silently on the bed, watching him. She was barely shivering now. When the fire finally blazed, Alejandro sat beside Marina and held her in his arms. They stared at the flames for a while. Then Marina turned to Alejandro and met his gaze. He looked into her stormy sea-colored eyes and felt his head spin as he leaned in to kiss her. Her lips tasted of salt. He ran his fingers through her damp hair, inhaling its scent. Then he looked into her eyes again, trying to decipher their secret. I want to be closer to you, she whispered. His answer was a long, gentle kiss. They spent the entire night in the lighthouse together. The next day, they were sitting at a table in their favorite cafe, Serena, drinking hot chocolate. Ale, aren't you afraid you'll end up all alone because of me? Marina suddenly asked. What do you mean? He asked in surprise. Haven't you noticed you don't talk to anyone but me? Marina replied quietly. I don't care about the others, he said. But it'll be the same in college, Marina said. They'll call you an outcast. Alejandro took her hand and looked into her eyes. Marina, as I've said, it doesn't matter, he said calmly. I just want to be with you. Everything else is unimportant. He hugged her tenderly. You're a real treasure, you know that, he whispered, stroking her hair. Warmth flooded through Marina, and she smiled. Just then, the cafe's doorbell rang softly. Marina looked up, and Alejandro felt her body tense. He turned to see who had come in, but there was no one. Through the glass door, he glimpsed something bright turquoise in the evening gloom, then it disappeared. He looked back at Marina. She was pale and uneasy. What's wrong, darling? Alejandro asked. Nothing, she said stiffly. He sensed she didn't want to talk about it and didn't press. They sat a while longer, then Marina said she had a headache. As Alejandro walked her home, he felt she was distracted and not hearing a word he said. That's odd, he thought, but he kept it to himself. The next day, Marina didn't show up at school. She must be sick, Alejandro worried. He could hardly wait for classes to end before rushing to see her. Teresa opened the door. Good afternoon, ma'am. I came to see Marina. She wasn't at school, and I was worried she might be ill, said Alejandro. Teresa's surprised expression turned anxious. But Marina isn't home, she replied, her voice trembling. I thought she was at school. Alejandro realized immediately. Then she's at the sea, he said quickly, dashing off. I'll find her, he yelled over his shoulder. Teresa watched him go in alarm. He reached the shore in minutes. A strong wind was blowing, the sun hidden behind clouds. Alejandro turned up his collar and walked along the beach. He soon spotted Marina in the distance. She wasn't alone. Someone else was with her, a tall woman. Her bright turquoise skirt billowed in the fierce wind, reminding him of the waves. Alejandro slowed his pace. Who was she? He'd never seen anyone like her. As he drew closer, the wind carried over a scrap of conversation. Repeat her fate, the woman said to Marina, whose shoulders trembled. What are they talking about? Alejandro wondered. At that moment, the stranger seemed to notice him. Her face twisted in alarm, she nodded to Marina, then hurried away. Marina turned around. Her eyes were full of tears. Who was that? Alejandro asked, stepping up to her and shielding her from the wind. And why weren't you at school? Marina just shook her head in response. I needed to think, she finally whispered. She was still trembling. Alejandro held her close to warm her, while Marina silently fidgeted with her pendant. He asked no further questions but sensed something was happening to her. He walked her home and made her promise to come to school the next day. She bit her lip and nodded before disappearing through the doorway. Alejandro wasn't ready to go home yet. He went to Serena and ordered a cappuccino. Sitting down at a table, he suddenly felt someone watching him intently. Looking up, he saw the same woman from the beach with Marina. She was wearing the same turquoise skirt and a dark blue blouse embroidered with strange bright patterns. And around her neck. Alejandro squinted to see better. Yes, there was no mistake, she wore a pendant shaped like a turquoise shell, the exact same one Marina wore. He dared to look at the woman's face. She looked around 60, with a prominent nose and thick eyebrows, and a gold ring glittered in her lower lip. But what struck Alejandro most were her eyes. They were the same stormy color as Marina's. Could they be related? But she looks like a wandering fortune teller. How can she be connected to Marina? Alejandro wondered. Their eye contact lasted only a minute. The woman abruptly stood up and headed for the exit. Alejandro watched her go, a terrible sense of foreboding rising in him. The next day, Marina again didn't show up at school. This time Alejandro didn't wait for class to end. He ran straight to the sea, but she wasn't there either. Unsure what to think, he dashed to Serena. The cafe was empty, the barista lazily flipping through a book. Pedro, have you seen Marina today? He asked. Yeah, she came in, the young man said. She was dressed kinda strange. Alejandro felt a surge of anxiety. A long skirt? That's right. And a headscarf with huge earrings, the barista confirmed. Is she going to a costume party or something? Was she alone? Alejandro asked urgently. Yes, but it looked like someone was waiting for her outside. She ordered a cappuccino and an espresso, plus 4 sandwiches to go. Thanks, man, Alejandro said, dashing out of the cafe. Marina was obviously with that woman again. But where could they have gone? A sudden thought hit him, the train station. Of course, they'd taken coffee and food for the road, and the station was only 2 minutes away. Alejandro ran there. Hurrying up to the counter, he asked the middle-aged clerk if she'd seen 2 women in bright outfits. Yes, they bought tickets for the train that just left. Alejandro let out a cry of despair. But where were they headed? To the capital. What? He gasped, unable to believe it. Could Marina really have gone so far away without telling him? He was devastated and had no idea what to do. Then an idea struck him, and he rushed home. His father was out of the country on a business trip, so his car sat idle in the garage. Alejandro didn't have his driver's license yet, but he knew how to drive. At that moment, he wasn't thinking about fines or legal trouble. He could only picture Marina on a train rolling farther and farther away from him. He resolutely opened the garage and slid into the driver's seat. As he pulled the car onto the street, Roberto appeared in the doorway. "What are you doing, Ale?" he yelled in horror. "None of your business," Alejandro snapped, pressing the gas. The engine roared, and the car vanished around the corner. "I'm calling Dad," Roberto shouted after him. Alejandro stepped harder on the gas. "I have to catch up and intercept the train at the next station," he told himself. Once out of town, he briefly stopped to set the GPS, then sped off again, gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles ached. "I must catch up. I must," he kept muttering under his breath. He ignored a dangerous road sign and didn't slow down. When a truck suddenly appeared around a bend, Alejandro didn't have time to react. He squeezed his eyes shut a second before the inevitable collision. The first thing he saw when he regained consciousness was the hospital's white ceiling and the soft beeping of machines. He tried to move, noticing he was tethered to a tangle of tubes. "You're awake, son," said a familiar voice, but at first he couldn't recall whose voice it was. Gradually, his eyes focused on the face hovering over him, and a few seconds later, he recognized his mother. "You gave us such a scare," she said, tears glistening in her eyes. "What happened to me, Mom?" Alejandro asked, struggling to speak. "You were in a terrible accident," she replied, voice trembling. Alejandro swallowed hard. I don't remember anything." Suddenly, the memories he wished he could forget came flooding back. He tried to stand. "Where's Marina? Did they find her?" he asked urgently. His mother shook her head. "Her parents filed a missing persons report, but there's still no news." Alejandro fell back against the pillow, feeling crushed. "Ale, listen," his mother said gently. "You shouldn't be so upset about some girl. You need to think about yourself. You've already been through so much. It's not right." Suddenly, Alejandro was filled with anger. "She's not some girl, Mom. I love Marina. Something bad happened to her, that woman got inside her head." His mother paled. "Ale, you need to rest," she whispered. She tried to stroke his head, but Alejandro's gaze froze her hand midair. "Since when do you fuss over me?" he snarled. "Didn't you get enough of that with Roberto? Or have we swapped places now?" It sounded cruel, and tears welled in his mother's eyes again. Alejandro knew he'd hurt her but didn't apologize. "Leave me," he said wearily, closing his eyes. She stood up. "The doctor said your spine is badly injured. They're not sure you'll be able to walk again," she said quietly. Cold sweat beaded on Alejandro's forehead. "Is that true?" he whispered. "Yes," his mother confirmed, "which is why you shouldn't be thinking about Marina right now. You need to focus on your own recovery." Alejandro said nothing. He refused to believe it. This can't be happening. The doctors must be exaggerating, he thought in desperation. Would you like me to stay? His mother asked. No, Mom, Alejandro replied firmly. I'd rather be alone. She nodded, lowering her head as she left the room. Alone, Alejandro had no idea how to go on living. In an instant, his life had changed beyond recognition, and in the worst possible way. Tears streamed down his cheeks, and he let them flow, then eventually drifted off to sleep. A month passed. Marina was still missing. Alejandro remained in his hospital bed, staring at the ceiling or sleeping most of the time. He was deeply depressed, having lost all sense of purpose. I wish I had died in that crash, he often thought. His parents tried everything to coax him out of it, but their efforts were in vain. As long as he doesn't want to live, there's nothing you can do, his doctor told them. Alejandro's mother couldn't hold back her tears any longer, and his father put a comforting arm around her shoulders. We understand, doctor, he replied quietly. A couple more weeks went by. One night, Alejandro had a dream. He was at the seashore near the old lighthouse, hearing Marina singing, though he couldn't see her. He searched the beach, calling her name, but couldn't find her. Forget me, my love, he heard her say. You must learn to live without me. But I can't. I love you, he cried desperately, falling to his knees. Live, my love, live. Marina's voice grew fainter with each word, until all that remained was the lighthouse's beacon in the darkness. Alejandro opened his eyes. By now, the dismal hospital surroundings were all too familiar, but he felt a sudden surge of frustration. How much longer will I stay here? He said aloud. He tried to get out of bed, but his body wouldn't obey. I need fresh air, he muttered. Just then, the doctor walked in. He was surprised and pleased to see a spark of life in Alejandro's eyes. Starting the next day, the doctors prescribed special exercises to help him regain lost mobility. With determination and patience, you might walk again, the doctor assured him. But it depends on the strength of your desire. I promise I'll try my best, Dr. Alejandro vowed. Rehabilitation was tough, but he put in all the effort he could. It took about a year, but the results were impressive. First, Alejandro could move around his room on his own, then he ventured outside with a cane. His parents were overjoyed to see his progress. His relationship with Roberto also improved. The younger brother gave him all the support he could, and a warm bond developed between them that hadn't existed in childhood. Of course, Alejandro had to give up on the idea of going to acting school. One day, as he sat in the living room browsing college brochures, his father came in. How are you, son? He asked, sitting beside him on the couch. I'm hanging in there, Dad, Alejandro said, smiling. Listen, Ale, his father began, clearing his throat. I never wanted to choose your path for you. So when you said you wanted to be an actor, I had no intention of standing in your way. Alejandro listened carefully. But given the circumstances, I've decided to offer you something I've dreamed of in secret ever since you were small, his father continued. You can refuse if you want, the choice is yours, Ale. Alejandro set aside the brochure he'd been holding. What is it, Dad? I'm offering you a place in my company. One day, when I retire, it'll be yours. A pang went through Alejandro's heart. Dad, I accept, he agreed without hesitation. He had long since understood the importance of sticking together and the blessing of a family that supports you. That makes me so happy, his father sighed in relief. I was afraid you'd be upset at me for suggesting it. No, Dad. Awkwardly, Alejandro scooted closer, and his father put an arm around him, patting his shoulder. They chatted for a while longer on various topics. Alejandro couldn't remember the last time he and his father had sat and talked like that. He was glad their relationship had grown so much stronger. And so a new life began for Alejandro yet again. He moved to the capital, rented his own apartment, and immersed himself in his father's business. Before leaving, he went to say goodbye to the sea. He sat by the old lighthouse for a long time, recalling that single night he had spent there with Marina. "I'm leaving, my love. It's time for me to move on," he said before heading away. Alejandro thought he could forget Marina, but he never did. In every girl he met, he found a reminder of her. No one touched his heart, he always remained alone. 10 years passed. Alejandro had become a successful executive who had elevated his father's firm to new heights. He multiplied his father's capital and opened his own chain of restaurants in the capital and other major cities. He named them Serena, after the cafe he and Marina had loved so much. His life was bustling: meetings, presentations, overseas trips, seeking sponsors, networking with potential business partners, giving interviews to magazines and TV. Such was his day-to-day routine. He had no romantic relationships, remaining the capital's most eligible bachelor. He still walked with a limp and used a cane, which only seemed to make him more charming in the eyes of many women. Yet Alejandro paid no attention to anyone. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't forget his first love. One evening, Serena was hosting an important meeting with foreign clients, and Alejandro wanted everything to be perfect. He had invited a French chef to cook that night and arranged for live music. Everything was flawless, one exquisite dish after another, wonderful music from the band, and the guests were delighted. At some point, a very attractive young woman approached Alejandro and handed him her business card with a smile. She was a journalist from a well-known foreign publication that wanted to do an interview with him. She had long red hair styled elegantly at the back of her head. Seeing it, Alejandro felt his heart clench. It reminded him of the love he had lost. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" he asked, distracted by his thoughts. But the journalist didn't have time to respond. Just then, a voice filled the restaurant, making everyone fall silent. Alejandro turned. On the stage stood a girl of about 10, with long chestnut hair and gray eyes like a stormy sea. She was singing so movingly that Alejandro's skin began to tingle. Yet it wasn't just her crystal clear, powerful voice. It was the song itself. It was the same song Marina had once sung by the sea. Even though 10 years had passed, Alejandro knew it at once. Overcome with emotion, he drew closer, forgetting to excuse himself to the journalist. It felt as if every cell in his body was listening to this magnificent melody. But eventually the song ended, and after a final repeat of the poignant chorus, the child fell silent. Applause thundered through the restaurant, the guests rising to their feet. Alejandro couldn't wait any longer. He rushed up on stage and knelt in front of the girl, gazing intently into her eyes. She blushed, not understanding what was happening. "What's your name?" he asked in excitement. "Perla," the girl answered, fidgeting with a chain around her neck. Alejandro noticed she was wearing some sort of pendant. "What's that?" he asked breathlessly. Silently, Perla showed him the pendant, a turquoise shell. Alejandro couldn't believe his eyes. "Where did you get it?" "My mom gave it to me. My grandma had one just like it," the girl explained. "Is your mom here with you?" Alejandro asked, looking around. "Did she come tonight?" Perla shook her head. "No, she's..." Alejandro braced himself. More than anything, he didn't want to hear that her mother had died. "She's sick," Perla said, her voice trembling with sorrow. "We need money for medicine. That's why I go around singing in restaurants. The musicians you hired are my friends, and they invited me here. They thought someone would help us because this is where the wealthiest people in the city gather. My mom really needs help." At these final words, the girl burst into tears. Alejandro gently took her hand. "Of course I'll help your mom. Quickly, take me to her." Perla wiped her eyes. "Really? You'll do that?" "But why?" "Because I love your mother," Alejandro said quietly. Perla's eyes widened. "So you know her?" He just nodded. "I hope so." He and Perla left the restaurant and got into his car. The driver took them to the address she gave. "This is our place," Perla said. "We live in the attic." Alejandro looked up to see a faint light in the upper windows. His heart pounded as they climbed the stairs. Finally, Perla opened a door and led him into a room. It was large and tidy but bare, just a closet, a big bed, a table with 2 chairs, and a small vanity. On it, Alejandro noticed shells of every shape and size. A woman lay on the bed facing the wall. Alejandro tried to make her out in the dim light. Perla approached and gently touched her shoulder. "Mom, wake up. There's someone here." "I think he knows you," she said softly. The woman moaned and turned over. Alejandro froze. It was Marina, the same Marina he had lost all those years ago. Taking a step forward, he said in a trembling voice, "Marina, it's me, Alejandro." She stared at him in surprise, then slowly sat up, smoothing her hair with her hands. "What are you doing here?" she asked quietly. "Your daughter told me you're ill, and I came to help," Alejandro answered. Marina looked into his eyes for a long time, and images from the past flooded his mind: the sea, the 2 of them standing together, the old lighthouse, its fireplace flickering. "I've missed you so much," he whispered. "I missed you, too," Marina replied, tears shining in her eyes. "Mom, I'm going over to Rosa's for a bit, okay?" asked Perla. "I saw their light was on." "Sure, but don't stay long," Marina said without looking away from Alejandro. The girl grabbed her doll and left the room. "She's not just my daughter," Marina said when they were alone. Alejandro stopped breathing for a second. Then he slowly approached the bed and perched on the edge. "Whose else is she?" he asked, almost in a whisper. "She's yours, Alejandro," Marina admitted. He felt stunned. "But how is that possible?" "That one night we spent together in the lighthouse gave us Perla," she said. Alejandro pressed his hands to his head. "But why? Why did you vanish afterward? Why did you leave? And who was that woman wearing a pendant like yours?" "She was my grandmother. She died a couple of years ago," Marina said, barely holding back tears. "But why did you leave me, Marina?" "You see, Alejandro, the women in my family have always been odd. Not like everyone else. My grandmother was a seer who used the forces of nature to foresee future events. My mother and I inherited certain gifts, too, though I didn't know it then. All I knew was that the sea called to me, and only there did I feel calm and whole." "Where is your mother?" Alejandro asked. "She died giving birth to me. My grandmother didn't take me in because she feared I would share my mother's fate if I stayed with her. She thought it would be better for me to grow up among ordinary people. But she stayed linked to me mentally. One day, she had a dream in which I fell in love and got pregnant. Grandmother was terrified I'd repeat my mother's fate and came for me. She said I had to go with her and that it would be best for both you and me." Alejandro took Marina's hand. "But why not come back once you knew you were pregnant? Didn't you trust me, my love?" he asked bitterly. Marina shook her head. "I was ashamed," she whispered, her voice heavy with old sorrow. "But I loved you so much," Alejandro admitted fervently. Marina glanced at his cane. "I found out you had a terrible accident. I believed it was our punishment for being happy. I feared if I returned, you'd face more tragedy and pain." "Oh, Marina," Alejandro murmured, shaking his head. "I never forgot you. Let me stay with you now, don't send me away." He gently pulled her into his arms, and Marina rested her face against his chest. "I never forgot you either," she said. "I dreamed of you every night." "I swear I'll take care of you, my love," Alejandro whispered. A calm warmth filled his heart, as though he'd finally found the home he had been seeking for so long. They remained there, holding each other, until Perla returned. Alejandro stood, still lightly holding Marina's hand. "I'll be back tomorrow morning with medicine," he promised, and she nodded through tears in her eyes. He kept his promise. Very soon, Marina began to recover. With each passing day, she grew stronger. When the young woman explained to her daughter that Alejandro was her father, Perla looked seriously at her mother and said, "I knew that from the start." Marina could only shake her head. Her daughter, too, had inherited their family's special gifts. Alejandro, Marina, and Perla spent a lot of time together, strolling in the park, rowing on the lake, shopping, like a real family. After a month, Alejandro presented Marina with a beautiful gold ring set with a pale blue stone and asked for her hand in marriage. She cried tears of joy. Their wedding was small and private, as they didn't want media attention. Right after the ceremony, they headed to the sea, where Alejandro had bought a cozy little house right on the shore. It was Perla's first time at the beach, and she was thrilled, playing in the waves, collecting shells, tossing stones into the water. "This is the happiest day of my life," she declared. Marina and Alejandro laughed. "And there will be so many more days like this," Marina said joyfully, and her husband nodded, looking at her with tenderness and love.